This is the Mosh Pit Backstage podcast for punk, metal and rock interviews and segments.
This is Reece from Diploid. You're listening to Mosh Pit on Sin FM.
Reece is from Melbourne band Diploid, who are releasing Everything Went Red on October 31st. Reece, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Now, why did you change the band name from the Diploid 49ers to just Diploid?
Oh, well, that was sort of like a high school sort of band, and it, it had different members, and it was like punk rock, Distillers-esque. It sounds nothing how we sound now. Once Mariam joined, we overhauled the band pretty much, and yeah, so it just wasn't the same band really. Essentially, I think of it as my high school band. I don't even think of it as the same band at all.
That's fair enough. Now, when did you kind of start introducing, what influences came in? Why the change in approach?
Well, when Mariam joined, she wasn't really into punk rock sort of music like I was. I was a huge Distillers fan, and Rancid and NoFX, stuff that I'm not really into these days anymore. But yeah, she joined that, and she wasn't really into that sort of stuff. But I was also into grindcore and metal and things like that. So we just sort of thought, and hardcore punk. I was getting into lots of 80s hardcore, like Black Flag and MDC and all that. So we just sort of thought that would go sort of down that route. And so this was sort of taking influence from powerviolence and grindcore, and now it's sort of evolving more into screamo as well, because I was starting to get into screamo bands and things like that. But now it's sort of more going into sort of noise and doom, but also keeping the grindcore and powerviolence sort of influences as well.
Now, how did you approach this album? What kind of influenced that sort of, I wouldn't say transition, but kind of shift?
I'm just trying to think. We started writing this record before we had even recorded the last one, so we've been writing it for a while. I'd gotten some, more toys, I guess, more pedals, and I started playing around with contact microphones and things like that, and so I've been doing a lot of noise stuff, improvised noise, and for years now, since I was 17 or something. And I wanted to sort of not keep it separate from the band anymore. I kind of wanted to actually do it within the band, just because I found myself not having enough time to sort of pursue it separately from the band. So I just sort of thought, might as well introduce it. And I got a sampler recently, because I've been putting in samples in our music forever, but hadn't been able to really translate that live, because I'd have to do it off my phone or something. It was really temperamental, really. So now I've got the sampler, so I have a whole noise table as well as I'm playing bass.
How did you get into noise?
It was actually it was basically when I was younger. I would go into Missing Link record store. It was in it was on Burke Street. It's not there anymore.
Yeah, I missed
but
that.
It was awesome. That store pretty much got me into local music. Before that, I only really listened to big bands, still into metal and whatnot. But I didn't. I grew up out in Pakenham, so an hour and 20 train ride. So when I was younger, I had no knowledge of local music in the city. Missing Link pretty much introduced me into local music, and they would sell tapes and 7-inches, and I didn't have much money. Probably shouldn't have been spending it on things I didn't really need, but I would just buy tapes and stuff. Some of them just randomly. Sometimes I would know who the band was, but I ended up buying one of Occult Blood's releases. I was actually listening to it the other night. I've got it right here. The Stephen Hawking one, and then I ended up buying Potato Human Split with Collapsed Toilet Vietnam, and pretty much from there. So from those two bands, which I think like Pete Hyde was in both of them, I'm pretty sure. So it's pretty much him, and then I started going to like noise gigs as I got older. So I just found more bands through that, and just I don't know. I took a liking to it. Like me and my friends would just jam noise stuff, for hours because we just could. Because where I lived wasn't like country, but it wasn't surrounded by houses, so we could sort of get away with making noise into the evenings.
Within the band, how do you sort of organise sort of collaboratively? When you've got some stuff, how do you come together and make it into what we would eventually hear on the record?
Like this time around with this record, I wrote a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it. So I usually, depending on how I feel with the track, will sort of write out like just like the rough idea of it. Usually I'll probably start off with the guitar of it, and then I'll just show that to Mariam, and she'll put her own little spin on it and add bits and pieces. And then we will just jam out this sort of like rough skeleton of the song for quite a long time until it just gets, more solid, and then we just sort of will change ideas or rethink of ideas, and, if we're unhappy with how the song actually sounds, we'll like cut it up, or maybe just, and like we right before we record the record, we had this other song that we ended up scrapping like right before we went to record because it just wasn't a very good song, and now we've reused a riff from that into a new song. So, sorry, I sort of lost my train of thought there. But, we just pretty much just jam on songs for ages and ages and ages. And usually everyone will sort of come in and bring like a riff and stuff like that. Like just this last record was mainly me, but with the record before that, we all pretty much contributed like a couple songs each.
All right, let's draw it back a bit. You alone, like, how do you generate ideas that you want to bring to the table?
Sometimes it varies, really. Sometimes I just, get an idea in my head, and then I try and flesh that out, either depending on what it is, either on the guitar or sometimes on the drums, or even just like trying to get a sound together. Like I'll go on my computer and just try and like get a sample sort of together that I like. Or, I'll be listening to bands and I'll really like a segment from a band, and then I'll try and imitate that, but, I don't really know how they're doing it, so then I'll come up with my own sort of version. So that's pretty much it, really. Sometimes I don't really know. I just play guitar I'll just play guitar for an hour or something, and a couple of riffs will sort of come together from that.
Noise is interesting because I think it's possibly one of the most things that people would struggle with in terms of getting into appreciating. I've listened to a bit of noise music, mostly just Merzbow, and I'm not there. Even though I appreciate a lot of obscure, abrasive music, I'm not there. Talk a little bit about noise music and how you kind of make something out of that which you then would want people to listen to.
I don't know, it's a bit of a tough one. I don't know. For me, I mentioned it a bit earlier about bringing the noise in to Diploid a bit more, just because I was doing it separately and didn't really have enough time to sort of pursue that avenue as much. I started bringing in the noise stuff and decide where I want some feedback or whatever, or samples or whatever. Sometimes I feel like, I don't know, there's a bit lacking in the sound. I don't know, it's like sometimes it's just not as, I don't know, it's just a bit empty. So I bring it in that way. Do you mean as sort of making noise tracks, like noise songs, or just into music?
Both. Like just noise music in general, and then bringing that into something which, isn't noise totally.
Okay, I guess, for me, when I listen to noise music and seeing Noise performances. Like, for me, it started off with not actually, like, there was those tapes, but also then going to gigs and seeing people perform it, I think, was something that sort of brought me in a lot more to it. When I'd heard the tapes and I was like, oh, this is a bit strange. Like, I never really listened to anything like this. But then also just watching YouTube videos of performers like Nasona from Japan, like, his performances are insane. And seeing Occult Blood live as well, like, a bunch of times, that was crazy. So, yeah, I guess for me it was sort of like watching it live and seeing how people produce it sort of gave me the curiosity as, like, to then listen to noise music and then sort of really try and think about how they're creating this sound. So, I don't know, like, that's an approach that I sort of took while getting into the music that sort of, yeah, really intrigued me and kept me listening, because I was always just curious as to how they actually are doing this. Like, what have you done to create this, 10-minute track of whatever. Yeah, and into the songs that I was mentioning before, I just sort of like to flesh out things a bit more with just, more behind it. Like, the Body were a real big influence in that as well, just because I sort of picked up in a lot of their songs, they have a lot of things going on behind, just the guitar and drums and vocals.
Additional to that, the sampling. Now, sampling is kind of something that I kind of got introduced to by some of the death metal tracks, sampling Serial Killers particularly, which is really, it's funny. But talk a little bit about how you sort of thought up, or what inspired you to say, I want to include samples in my music, and where you put samples and why?
As to starting off doing it, I can't even really think what made me think, like what bands or what musicians made me go, oh, I'm going to do this. Like, I just knew I knew people did it. Like, I knew people grabbed snippets of either, like, from, I don't know, anything and playing it over their music. Yeah, and as to where and how, or, as to where we put it into our songs, I'm just trying to think exactly. Like, a lot of the times I like to use them as, like, introductions or sometimes in between tracks or over sort of, like, low volume tracks, just because, like, for one thing with Diploid, we don't have any clean vocals, so in sections that are sort of, like, low volume or kind of clean, putting samples, whether it be, like, a sample from a movie or a documentary, or even just, like, a sample of something I've previously recorded, like, I don't know, sometimes guitar tracks, or sometimes just, like, feedback, or, I know, like, I had on a record I sampled, like, rain and crickets and stuff from my window, and then put that as a bridge in a song. So where we decided to put it, I'm not really sure exactly. Sometimes it's just like, oh, this needs to go here, or I guess it's sort of to bridge things together sometimes, or just sort of add intros and outros and things like that. And like a lot of our songs are sort of pretty grim and things like that, so I will grab samples related to the topic of the song usually as well.
There's a sample that runs through the album. I think it introduces, outros, and I believe it may appear somewhere else. What is that sample from? On everything. Everything Went Red. Yeah.
That's pretty grim one. That one. There was I had heard of this documentary. I was told it was a documentary about it's like sexual sadists and just predators and things like that. I ended up tracking down the video. It's on YouTube, and it's not even a documentary. Like, it is kind of a documentary, but it's not really. It's actually like a university like study help video from like, I'm gonna say the early 90s, late 80s or something. So yeah, it's like it says at the end that it was an American, like it would get played to you in your like psych course or something. And they just interviewed people who, they were in prison, but they interviewed them in sort of just like civilian clothes. And they would interview them first with like, so these people have sort of like, not split personalities, like that's not the right word, but they have their outward personality that they show to the public, and then they have this sort of their inward personality, which is the personality that would sort of go out and, you know, hunt people down and, you know, abuse people and things like that. And so in that doco, they talk to this guy who, his story, like his outward appearance to something that sort of happened to him is that he came to this lady's house, and then, you know, they sort of got together, and then a neighbour heard or something and came by, and then he left, and then she said that, you know, he attacked her, and he was like, no, I was, you know, she was just cheating on her husband. So he just goes through that, and he says it real genuine, real straightforward, and then they actually, you know, then he goes and actually tells about what he really did, and that's what we end up sampling, is, you know, he's hidden his lying personality, basically. His, like, true personality, not the one that he shows to everyone else. So, yeah, it's just this university video, that sort of explores that, and I don't know, it's just something that really intrigues me, and kind of real scary when you think about it, but because one of the things they go into in the video as well is about like how they lie to people and how they're really good at it and all this stuff like that. It's pretty messed up. So we sort of brought that in as that sort of like, because the record has like the record has a few different sort of themes throughout it, but one of them is sort of like the what people truly think and what they truly believe, but won't sort of put out there forward just because they know how insane it is, really. But yeah, that's where we got that sample from.
When you're coming up with themes, when themes are developing for the album, how does that work? Is that something you specifically try to develop? Is that something which kind of naturally generates itself? How does it all work?
Well, again, it's another thing that sort of varies from, you know, it varies in the writing process. Sometimes, you know, we've got a song that we've just got the music, and it's just like, what can we write about? And you know, sometimes sometimes like one of us will just think of something, or, you know, we would have watched a documentary or read a book, and because a lot of the times it's sort of based off of actual things that have happened. It's not really fantasy or anything like that. You know, or maybe even based off a news article or a person. But yeah, that's sort of, or, you know, so that's basically what we sort of do, is sort of just take it from, you know, documentaries or, articles or something like that, and then, just sort of flesh it out into a song. As for, like, overarching sort of themes throughout, like, records and stuff, like, this one sort of has, like, this new record sort of has, like, not one theme throughout it. It's, like, got a few others. Like, basically, like, there's a couple songs that sort of are about this rough same thing. But, yeah, a lot of the time, this record, I'm just trying to think exactly, like, I wrote most lyrics for this record, so it was just sort of me with that. And Marion wrote a couple as well. But usually whoever's sort of writing the lyrics for the song is the person sort of behind the meaning of that song.
You mentioned Last Podcast on the Left in the acknowledgements of the album on Bandcamp. I'm a fan of Last Podcast on the Left as well. And I actually got a friend who we sort of have those similar interests in. It kind of reminded me a bit of you and Miriam. But like I've just been sort of processing it lately, and I've sort of been thinking about whether this, particularly the fact that there's an incredible wave of true crime podcasts lately. I was just like, whether it's this just perverse in a way, this focusing on, even if it's not necessarily for comedic purposes like it is in Last Pod, like whether it's some just weirdness that we kind of focus on, these people and the things that they do to other people, which are terrible. I'm just wondering if you, as someone who sort of is clearly thinking about similar sorts of things, your kind of thoughts about that.
As to why it's so popular, like, is that what you're sort of saying?
No, like, I don't know. I've kind of got this sort of like thought in my head that maybe it's wrong, but like I'm not the person to say that because I'm, I listen to death metal, I listen to Last Podcast on the Left and stuff. Yeah, it's just kind of those thoughts. I don't know if there's a really good answer to that, but
I sometimes toss it up. So, like, I've had a few points, listening to the podcast, and even just like I've always been into sort of true crime and horror as well. Like, even before sort of the podcast, I think the first time I ever sort of like started reading up about like a serial killer, it was Ed Gein, because I was listening to Slayer and they had that song Dead Skin Mask when I was like, I must have been like 13 or something. That's the first time that I sort of got introduced to it. It's a bit weird. I even went to a point where I was sort of like, maybe I should stop reading about this shit, because it really was kind of warping my mind a little bit. It was sort of, making me think that everyone's sort of crazy. But I don't know. Like, it's a bit of a tough one if it's actually good to sort of look into it. Like, I know. I feel like if you're, because there's always that thing of like, are you idolizing these people? And it's kind of like, for me, I'm not. Like, I'm not thinking, I don't praise them in any way or anything. And even like in our lyrics and stuff, we're not sort of talking about the actual physical murder or, the gross sort of stuff that happens, even though sometimes that's pretty interesting to read about. For me, it's sort of more about like a lot of stuff is sort of more about like why that person, what do you call it? Rationalized? Like, they like rationalized that idea. Like, they eventually were kind of like, no, I can do this horrible thing that I know is horrible. I mean, not all of them sort of do. Like, I guess some people are a bit, a bit too far gone to even sort of make proper decisions. But, for me, it's sort of more looking about, like, why they eventually got to where they are, rather than the actual crime they committed. And I don't really idolize the crime. It's just interesting to see what people are capable of, really. It's sort of like, is it actually good or not? I'm not really sure.
There's a really great compliment between your and Miriam's vocal styles. The sort of more mid-range, sort of going a little bit lower occasionally for you, and Miriam's got that great piercing scream. How do you make them work together? They often sort of flow off each other really nicely. What goes into putting that together in a song?
Well, when we're writing the vocal melodies, I guess you'd call them, I guess it usually just sort of starts off as sort of like, I'll sing this part, you sing this part. We don't really sort of think about, how we're going to sing it. We sort of just work on that as we go. And sometimes don't work on that as we go. Sometimes it just is up to the time when we record. Like, in all honesty, there isn't, like, it's something we're actually going to start working on a bit more, but we don't actually really put that much effort into the writing of the vocals, like the vocal melodies and stuff. I mean, we sort of say, like, you can sing this part, I'll sing this part. And then usually we'll try and make it, if, like, it's like you sing this part, but during that part, the, bass part is super hard, then we'll switch, or something like that. I guess not the best answer in the world, but we don't really think about it that much. It just sort of happens, I guess.
No, that's fair enough. Now, this kind of maybe kind of obvious because of the style of music you're playing, but why the short song? What is it about that you've sort of taken on board and gone with and run with? The short song thing, I guess, like, one of the first sort of, like, well, not the first, but I don't know, like, I'm a big fan of just, like, I've listened to Extortion since I was probably, like, I don't know, 14 or 15 years old, and then I was still really like this band F-, like, their first album, like, I think the longest track's, like, 50 seconds or something. And, Napalm Death as well, like, Scum, that record, I listened to that a lot when I was, like, I don't know, 16 or something. I don't know, it's not like the song's so short that it only has one riff or something. It's like, usually they'll have at least two, and it's pretty quick, so it ends up just being real quick. I don't really know. I'm also just a big fan of bands that do short songs. In contrast to that, Can No Longer Drag My Body Across This Earth, there was one long track. What was behind making that track? Was that kind of the noise stuff coming into it, and sort of the influenced by some of the noise musicians and their longer tracks?
That release was originally meant to be on a split release, and we had actually all just been to Indonesia and Malaysia and stuff, so I recorded a bunch of stuff while I was over there, and I've actually used it in that track. And while I was overseas, I was listening to this album called Consume Red, and it's by this group called Ground Zero. They were like a Japanese noise group from, I think, the early 90s or late 80s or something. But I wanted to do something similar to that, and then we got offered to do this split release, so we're like, oh yeah, we could maybe do like just a sort of an improvised noise track sort of thing. And then we got back and recorded it, and it had like the samples already and everything from the trip. But then the release just kept on getting delayed, and so we even actually got the opportunity to record again. So we were like, oh, let's just put out the old one, because like that release, like, while it's like, I listened to it like, I don't know, a month ago, the first time in ages, and when it was first done, I was a bit like, it's okay, but it's not great. I think it's a bit better now. But it was a bit like, oh, well, let's not put this onto a record, let's do something again, and then the opportunity to record again came up. So we've actually recorded another, like, I think it's like, the next one's like 12 minutes, and that one, it was recorded by like Chris Brownbill from Idol, so it actually sounds like pretty decent, whereas the other, like that release, I Can No Longer Drag My Body, was done in our house. So that's sort of how that one came about.
In terms of artwork, like, you've used a lot of collages in the past, but like, what was the approach for this album?
Well, with this one, we didn't sort of want to do another collage record cover, just because we've done a number of them now, and it was a bit just like, let's try and do something a bit different. I kind of wanted to do photography, because I just thought, like, I've just sort of been intrigued about photography, especially sort of like using, actual like film rather than digital camera sort of stuff. We just sort of went with that approach. I wanted to do something that was sort of related. Well, we wanted to do something that was sort of related to, it's a bit weird, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but have you ever seen those photos of Dennis Rader when he's tied himself out in a park somewhere? Like, it's real weird, like the BTK killer guy.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen that.
It's pretty weird, but we wanted to do something sort of similar to that in a way, like sort of almost recreate those images, and also just sort of use a lot of we wanted to do some like nude photography, but like while it isn't nude, it's like while it ended up with not actually nude stuff. That's sort of where we're leading to. So that's basically why, because we just thought we'd done a lot of collages, so we wanted to do something else.
A couple of questions just about you, even though I've already asked some. When did you start listening to heavy music? Like when I was younger, cause I am the youngest of two older brothers, the first sort of like non-top 40 record, although it actually probably could have been in the top 40 at the time anyway, was Rage Against the Machine's Self-Titled. That was like the first rock, not pop, not video hits sort of music, and that was probably when I was like, I don't know, 11 maybe. I would have been younger than that actually. Probably would have been more like 8 or something. So it was the first time I heard that, and then my brother was a big music fan, so he started just like downloading heaps of things, and I think sort of like the first like metal sort of band I was into was System of a Down. Like, they were the first band I found when I was probably like, I think 10 for that one. Then I also got into punk because I had a friend in high school who was really into punk music, so I listened to lots of punk as well. But, then I also got into like Slipknot. And then I made another friend as I got older in like
I think year 8 or year 9 who was into lots of death metal and stuff. So I ended up listening to like grindcore through him because I don't know, death metal was a bit too much for me at that point. So I liked grindcore because I don't know, I think I sort of liked the punk sort of overtone as like for Napalm Death and things like that. Yeah, I don't know, yeah. So yeah, fairly young, and then just sort of I don't know, took a big shining to music and just kept on finding more and more obscure things.
When did you start playing an instrument?
I started playing drums when I was like 13 years old or something. My brother actually got a drum kit for his, I think, 18th birthday, and then I actually still have it. Yeah, so I ended up just sort of playing the drums then, and then I ended up picking up sort of guitar and bass because my brothers both played guitar and bass, and so it was just around the house a lot, so I got to just, like, I started to learn tabs and just went from there with those two instruments.
Do you have any local shows coming up?
We have one on the 23rd of November. Actually don't know where it is, because I haven't been told yet. So there's that one. That's meant to be with Idols for their album launch in Melbourne, so that'll be pretty sweet. And then we have one on the 2nd of December at the Old Bar. But then I think that's it for the year for us in Melbourne anyway. We're going to go up to New South Wales and play some shows up there.
Diploid, they're releasing their album Everything Went Red on October 31st, and we'll pump those shows up when we get some details about them.
Oh, well, thanks for talking to me.
Thanks for listening to the Moshpit Backstage podcast. You can subscribe to us on iTunes and Omni. To find out more about the show, go to www.syn.org.au/moshpit. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/moshpitonsyn and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at moshpitsyn. The regular Moshpit radio show broadcasts punk, rock and metal tunes and interviews every Thursday nights on Syn 9.7 on FM and digital radios. Listeners outside of Melbourne, Australia can stream Syn 9.7 online at www.syn.org.au. Thanks to Vintage Ruin for the music.
Hi, this is Tomato from Flashgun Apocalypse.
Hi, I'm Enid from Girls Go.
I am Phoebe Pinnock from Heaven the Axe.
Hey, this is Gary Olney of the Misfits.
Hey, this is Kat Sproul from Horizon's Edge, and you're listening to The Mosh Pit on Syn FM.
Hi, this is Einar from Leopard.
Hi, I'm Virginia Lilly from the band Lily.
This is Raul from 1349.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ali from Zebrahead.
Hey, everybody, this is Charlie Benante with Anthrax, and you are listening to The Mosh Pit on Syn.